All right, let's bring him in. Kevin McPherson at AR Hoop Scoop on Twitter. Kevin, good morning. People were freaking out yesterday when they didn't see Isaiah Joe in the video. I know Whole Hog Sports, you and others have reported that he was also not in the first Monday practice as well. Does that lead you to believe that it looks like he's leaning towards the NBA, or are people blowing this way out of proportion when it comes to his decision?
Well, first of all, I can't blame people. I don't know if they're blowing it out of proportion simply because you've had 4.5 months of uncertainty. And even though there's still uncertainty in terms of an actual season being played out, when you get the coaches and the players and some kind of formal basketball activities back on the floor for the first time since the SEC tournament abruptly ended in Nashville, the magnifying glass is even stronger, right? The optics are out, everybody's paying attention. So when Isaiah Joe's not on the floor, since having returned to Fayetteville with teammates, everybody knows he's in that NBA draft pool. But he came back in June with the veterans, been going through strength and conditioning. That's been all been voluntary. You know, the shooting work that they did in the Performance Center, voluntary, with some GAs in there. So you had, folks knew he was back. As he keeps, I think, he's got one foot on both sides of the fence, right? One, considering and weighing his option to return to Arkansas for his junior season. The other foot in that NBA draft pool still with an August 3rd deadline coming up. But to answer your question, I think it's understandable for fans that are hungry for this team to get going. I mean, you've got a top 5 national high school recruiting class. You've got a top 10 transfer class with these 3 grad transfers, according to most of the college analysts. And so there's a lot of excitement. And, of course, Isaiah Joe's the centerpiece. So I don't know that they've overreacted, but at the same time, I don't think him not being part of this so far in terms of them getting back on the court with the coaches suggests he's leaning anyway. He's got, now 12 more days in this process before that deadline. There's a report that comes out. It comes out for the first time, and this is the Underclassmen Advisory Committee's report. Comes out early in the process, and that's what makes a lot of these underclassmen, when they get that back, actually formally get into that draft pool and declare. The second one of those is just going to be coming out here in a few days, and so that's worth waiting on for a guy that's gone through the process. Now, let's also remember, players haven't been able to travel and meet with teams, work out for teams. There's been no combine. So there's a lot of stuff they've missed. And all of this stuff we're talking about, Ty, this would have already played out. I mean, in a normal calendar, you've already had an NBA draft. We would have known Isaiah Joe's decision back in June. So it's an unfortunate set of circumstances and timing. Yeah, fans freaked out a little bit, but you know what? Let's let him finish his process. I don't know that he's leaning either way, and I think there's a strong chance he still comes back to Arkansas.
So, Kevin, if the next video comes out and Coach Muss is, barking orders at the team in this skills and drills non-contact practice, and there's Isaiah Joe right in the middle of it, we shouldn't also equally freak out that he is coming back.
I think that's true. That's a good point you made. And you know what? I'm not sure if we're going to see him until August 3rd. We might. But I think until that date, or until he announces if it's before that date that he's coming back or going, we shouldn't read too much into anything. And that's a great point you made. I think the fact that he came back to Fayetteville to be a part, he could have stayed in Fort Smith. He has access to gyms and just strictly worked on NBA stuff. I think the fact that he came back says a lot about his intentions, that he, really is considering a return to Arkansas. And I don't think we should take this as him shutting that down. We should take it as there's only a few more days left in his process, and he's got to focus on that because we know all players want that next level opportunity. If it's the right time for him, he's going to go. But he needs to find out if it is, and to just kind of leave it all behind right now and focus strictly on the Razorbacks, I think would be selling himself short, especially with that second UAC report coming out. That's coming out in the next few days. That's the kind of the timing, as we get to that NCAA deadline. So, but you made a great point there. If we see him in one of these team videos, don't read too much into it right now.
Kevin McPherson with us here on the Morning Rush talking Arkansas basketball. Kevin, that's the biggest question people want to know. But with camp starting this past Monday, what are the other big storylines that you're heavily invested in when it comes to this Arkansas basketball team moving forward?
Wow. There's several. I keep hearing since the freshmen moved up at the end of June, I keep hearing about the shooting work that Moses Moody's just opened a lot of eyes. And we knew he was an elite shooter. We knew he was a big-time shooter at Montverde Academy on the Nike EYBL circuit. But I think when you get it up close and personal, here's a guy that's 6'6", still growing, broad shoulders, 7+ foot wingspan, good basketball player, really high floor IQ, unselfish player, but a guy that sets up as a volume shooter scorer. And, you lose a Mason Jones and a guy like Moses Moody, to me, he's a headliner. I mean, he's a guy that a lot of these early, 2021 NBA draft mocks out there have him as a first-rounder, and you could see why. And I've just heard nothing but good things about his shooting. I've heard that Vance Jackson's really impressed folks with his perimeter skill. We knew that was a part of his package coming in. But, again, this team, because of the size, I think that's another big storyline. Is this the biggest Arkansas team ever? I know Connor Vanover will be the tallest Razorback to ever play. But if you look across that roster, the size, the length, the talent, I mean, you don't get a top 5 recruiting class and a top 10 transfer class without having a lot of talent in there. The other thing is, we could talk about 10 newcomers all we want, but there's a lot of veterans in these newcomers. The 3 grad transfers, the 3 sit-out guys that have D1 experience and have been a year under Musselman. And, of course, you guys like Desi Seals, Ethan Henderson, that have been through those SEC wars. I think there's a lot of storylines here. I think the talent level, I think there's a reason this team's in a lot of these way top 25, way too early top 25s. Isaiah Joe's a big part of that. I think even if he's not in the equation, I think this is still a team that has a chance to build an NCAA tournament resume.
Kevin, one of the guys that kind of gets lost in the shuffle is Jacksonville transfer Jalen Tate. Now, I was told by several people within the basketball program that he was one, if not the best practice player last year. Some guys are better in practice, they are in games. But do you think we've taken in account enough what he could bring to the table this upcoming basketball season?
Well, that's just it. I mean, I've heard the same things. He had he's a 3-level scorer from all accounts I heard, in that he was consistent. But there's a difference between doing it in practice and then when the live bullets, under the lights, when it matters, we need to see that. But by all accounts, here's a guy they're going to lean on heavily. I think when I look at this roster, I mean, that's another storyline, another big storyline you could talk about. I think when you look at the roster, you've got 12 guys, in my opinion, at least 12, that could be in a legitimate cases to be in a top 8 or 9 rotation. Many of those can bring starter value. Eric Musselman's a 7 to 8 player rotation guy. Something's got to give, fellas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you get bigger, you probably give up some agility and you give up some speed. So you've got to find other ways to overcome that, because as you add size, you generally inherently give up some of that ability to travel the floor with the same speed you've given up. How are some of the ways through these rotations and through some of the things you're going to try to do to still defend the 3? Because that's been one of the things he's been really non-negotiable about, is defending the perimeter. How do you still do those things? Because that seems to be the backbone of what Musselman wants to do, is defend the 3.
Yeah, and so I've been thinking about that a lot when I started looking at how he built this second roster. Because last year, when you're short on numbers on the front line and size on the front line, you had to play to your strengths. And this was the top 3-point field goal defense, top 10 in the country in turnover margin. So as you get bigger, you may not be able to defend and close out on guys and stay with guys as well on the perimeter. But Arkansas was not very good. We know they were the worst team in the SEC in rebounding. We know that they had a hard time defending the paint. Those things will get better. The thing I like about the versatility in this lineup, though, even if he sticks with an 8-man rotation, is that rotation might change based on matchups and needs. So I think there's enough in that lineup with quickness. A guy like Justin Smith at 6'7", he's got a 48-inch vertical. That makes up for a lot of problems. And he's quick. He moves his feet. He can defend guards. We know that Desi Seals can defend on the perimeter. We'll see how good of a defender J.D. Note is. If Isaiah Joe comes back, Musselman raved about his defense last year, and, he can get better there and probably will. But, I think there's enough versatility in that lineup for Arkansas to still be good. Maybe there won't be a ton of slippage in that perimeter defense, but that was a great point you brought up, something I've been thinking about, and we just have to see how it plays out.
Thinking of the point guard position, I was listening to the coaching staff visit with season ticket holders last night on a Zoom call, and when asked about the point guard position, one of the first players Coach Musselman brought up was Jalen Tate. Now, he went through a few other players, but I found it interesting. He spent a lot of time talking about one of the transfer players that are coming in and how he compared to Jimmy Witt. If you spend any time and thought on that comparison and how maybe Tate compares to who Arkansas had as a senior last year in that role?
I've thought about it a lot. I mean, he's a 3-time Horizon League all-defensive performer. He's a guy at 6'6" with good length. We know Jimmy Witt. It's a little misleading to say he was 6'3" because his arms were so long. He really defended like a 6'5", 6'6" guy. I mean, and that was a big part of his arsenal. And I just think we saw what Jimmy Witt did. They're not going to be. He's not an identical player, but he's not really a 3-point shooter offensively. He's kind of a combo guard like Jimmy was. Jimmy wasn't a true point guard, but I think Jalen coming in as a senior, a veteran at the D1 level, a strong Northern Kentucky program in the Horizon League. There's really good mid-majors out there, and we see when these players come up a level, sometimes they really thrive like Jimmy Witt did. And I think that Jalen Tate, when Musselman brings in these grad transfers, they didn't come in, to have a backup role. They're coming in to play significant minutes, play in crunch time minutes, and bring starter value. So I see what Musselman sees in Jalen Tate. I love his film, but really there's a whole lot to like about most of the guys as he's built this roster.
Talking with Kevin McPherson here on the Morning Rush. Kevin, when you look at this roster, as you and Tommy were talking about the height that's been added, whether it's Justin Smith at 6'7", Vance Jackson at 6'9", Connor Vanover at 7'3", looking at those, do you think it's more likely that Arkansas will use 2 big men like a Jalen Williams and a Connor Vanover, a Jalen, and an Ethan Henderson? Or do you think they'll go small a lot of times? And I say small being the relative term, but use more forward and guard-only lineups this upcoming season, just kind of off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of 2-man game. I think Musselman likes versatility, and so a lot of times the guys that can handle the ball and create, like a Vance Jackson, who's really a 3-4 combo at 6'9". So I think I don't know that we're going to see a lot of 2 big, traditional big guys, but even Vanover's not a traditional big. He can space the floor. He's going to play a lot of 2-man game high. Jalen Williams can do the same thing. Would be interesting to see one of those guys playing facing, another guy in the mid post and working together maybe a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think the options for Musselman, though, I think he does a lot of things based on personnel and matchups of opponents. So we might see a lot more combinations than we saw last year when he was limited.
So Jeff Goodman of Watch Stadium, John Rothstein of CBS Sports, they have Arkansas slotted at 5th this upcoming SEC season. I've seen 24/7 had them at 3rd. Some other people have them at 4 and 6. Kevin, if Isaiah Joe decides, you know what, I'm coming back for my junior year, where, in your opinion, should Arkansas be slotted preseason in the SEC?
I think 4 or 5 range is right. I think you get him back. These way too early top 25s. I just mentioned that earlier, but they're probably right. Arkansas belongs in there, and I think potentially this is a top 15 type of team. Man, I know it's we're here. I am in July talking about that stuff, and we could say 10 newcomers all we want, and losing a guy like Mason Jones and Jimmy Witt and even Adriel Bailey, who had his best year as a senior, but the talent's just undeniable. The size and the versatility through the lineup. And I really think, we haven't even talked about guys like K.K. Robinson and Devontae Davis, and I think at least one of those guys is going to have an impact. I just think that, that top 4 or 5 is about right in the SEC, and I think the potential for this team to grow into a top 15 type team is there.
Kevin, the team right now is getting 4 hours a week on the floor with the coaches. They're spending an hour a day, 4 days a week. Coach said they may change that to 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and they get 4 hours a week with the trainers. That's about half the time they normally get in the offseason. How big a setback is that in a second year with a coach in a largely overhauled roster?
Yeah, I don't know that it is. I mean, there's certainly some hurdles there, but let's also realize that a lot of programs haven't started yet. Who knows when some of them will. And I think because of Musselman's experience with dealing with roster turnover in bulk for so many years, he's a creative thinker, out-of-the-box thinker on the fly, and I don't know that he sleeps a lot. So I think he prepares for things. He talked about it on that July 1 press conference about having, different rotations and vantage points on his roster based on whether Joe's back or not. Granted, that's all on him. Now that's got to transfer to players, but I think he's been used to doing that for so many years. I think Arkansas might actually have some advantages based on this situation, if you want to call it an advantage, because of Musselman and his staff's experience.
Sunday night, he had the team over to the house for dinner. Then Monday night, he took the team to Topgolf, and they're doing some team bonding, building some chemistry. How do you think the Topgolf went? What you know these players? Who probably showed out the most at Topgolf amongst this roster?
I have no idea. I really have no idea.
That would have been interesting to be a few bays over and watch this group of guys pound some golf balls.
Yeah, I think so. And the thing about of course, Isaiah Joe. We've talked a lot about him. Here's a guy that was a good golfer. Yeah. He is a good golfer. But I really don't know about the golf games of most of those guys, and I haven't got any reports on that. But I'd like to hear if someone's got one. I'd like to hear it.
I was talking to my roommate about this last night. I was like, "Hey, did you know the basketball team went golfing?" He said Moses had put on his Instagram story. Kevin, he was making fun of KK because KK was not the best apparently of swinging the golf club.
Well, there's golfing and there's Topgolf. Those are two different things, and Topgolf's pretty fun. So,
yeah, I mean. And what's interesting in the bonding thing, that's the key, right?
Right. That's why you win.
Guys, some of the playfulness I've already seen on social media seems genuine to me, and I think there's some of the older guys really like what they see in this freshman class. When I've talked to the freshmen who I know, have known for years, building relationship and just getting some nuggets from them about, what they thought about these guys that are coming in as transfers, nothing but good things to say. And I don't think they were just saying things good because they're supposed to. There was some genuine thoughts in those reflections, and I think as they continue to bond, the talent is one thing. I think Musselman will do a good job of building chemistry. I really saw that last year for the most part when he's taken. He's overhauling. He's coming in to a situation where he didn't recruit those guys, so that's an even tougher chore. So I think most of these guys now they're his. I think he's going to help them along in that team bonding, and the Topgolf is part of that.
And one of the things he said was the four freshmen were the last to leave at his house and the last to leave at Topgolf, and they came together and left together, but they were hanging out together and spending a lot of time together as a freshman group. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, and these are in-state guys that grew up playing together. They've built their bonds over the years, and they're continue to get stronger. And it's really. You get four top 100 guys in the same class from inside these borders, and they have familiarity, and they know some of the current Arkansas players, guys like Desi Sills and Isaiah Joe and Ethan Henderson, going back to before they got to campus. So I think there's some value there. You've got 8 Arkansans on this roster of 13. That's a huge story. When you're asking me what are some of the big stories, that's a big one. I think that's unprecedented, and I think that can help pay some dividends. Because I think there's some chemistry and bonds that have been worked through before just being thrown together these last couple of 6 weeks or so.
Kevin, and I'll top off the interview with this, man. You bring up the chemistry aspect. I know KK and Moses at one point in time played AAU together. Devontae Davis and Jalen Williams were on the Arkansas Wings Elite, and not the Wings Elite, the Woods Elite. And so there is some connection, some familiarity, whether it's playing with each other, whether it's playing against each other. But that's been the question mark is you have 10 guys on this roster that currently have not suited up in a college basketball game for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Are we overhyping the chemistry issues that might occur based on the past that these guys have actually had in common with each other?
Maybe. And I think chemistry, a lot of that is what buttons does the coach push? What does he know about his players? How does he put them in positions to not only excel individually, but put them in the right personnel matchups and packages? And I think Musselman's very OCD and thorough about that kind of stuff. And I think that helps build chemistry. There's other stuff that goes into that, right? Personalities and locker room stuff and all of that. But if you can have success on the floor and show them how they're going to be successful, and you run your organization like an NBA organization, you kind of sometimes check some of the smaller stuff at the door and go in there and do the work. And I think that's the kind of program they're establishing. We're just now getting into year 2, so we're going to see what works and what doesn't. But I think a big part of chemistry is not just the bonding stuff, but also what are you giving them X's and O's wise? Mm-hmm. What are you showing them they can accomplish? Because I think that helps, that basketball language when it's clicking, that can build chemistry pretty fast.
Kevin McPherson at AR Hoop Scoop on Twitter. You can also read his stuff on Hogville. You can read his stuff on KNWA.com, and you can watch him on the Pig Trail Nation. Kevin, appreciate it always, man. Getting more excited for basketball season.
Great to be with you guys, man. It's the time to get excited.
Exactly right.
Thanks, Kevin.